Just kidding, I'm back. Now let's talk about The Last of Us. So, The Last of Us Part 1, the remake that is a wonderful companion piece to the original version of the game. Unfortunately, I know all too well that it will be used as a replacement for the original one. It's a shame, because having been able to get my hands on the remaster, which costs $20 a pop, a fraction of the remake's $70 by the way, that original game has so much to offer. Despite what the advertising may imply, these games feel like they're from two different worlds, and that's almost entirely thanks to the difference in their art direction due to graphical capability. I think that the original game shines where it strives to be creative. The remake doesn't need to use the same tricks the OG does, because the PlayStation 5 has so much power backing it up. If you have the chance, play both. If you don't, I say buy and beat the original. My favorite thing about this game is that it knows exactly what it is. The Last of Us uses the idea of a fungus that turns people into zombies, and, especially in the remaster of the original, in a world that seems like it's got the type of whimsy and levity of that of a comic book, undercuts that whimsy with a stunning horror. If you're coming to this game series from the TV show, you're in for a couple of differences. Like, cordyceps is spread through spores, not tendrils. The show takes its time getting to the hook, bringing you in how you would expect a 90-minute drama to. It's got its thought-provoking opener and creeps and burns like a movie. In the game, it's right into the action, beginning where the show picks up 17 minutes in. What's interesting is that compared to the show now, it feels like there's corners being cut. There's little moments that add and build character, as well as parts that pick up any lulls to add to the overarching narrative. In the game, there's no Mrs. Adler and Mercy. Sarah doesn't learn about the outbreak the way she discovers it in the show. In fact, everything with her happens before we can understand what's even going on. In TV show form, I love the way it plays out, drip feeding us the info and giving us enough to attach to so that when things really get going, you feel your blood pumping and you pay attention. Despite all of the praise that I have for the show, none of this is actually a knock against the game. They both have their purposes. The game is straightforward. Especially for a piece from 2013, it's stunning how masterfully this narrative-driven experience rolls out. It throws you into scenarios that build on an encounter-by-encounter basis. Once you have context for a situation, you get thrown into the fray, playing out the details until the apex of a dramatic point. Then the cutscenes play. This is the difference between the show and the games. In the show, there are these little moments that give you more context before action flares up, and you get to a place that's like, oh, I played that in the game. In the game, you play fragments that could be those moments. There's an opportunity to shape the experience in a way that feels so much more personal, and you get to embody and empathize with the characters in a way that isn't normally possible. For example, the first thing that I did when I played the remake after messing around with the original game was see if I could have run in the opening. After the intro with Sarah, you're taken to the next section of the game, and you learn how to sprint. I remember thinking, could I have changed how things played out? Could it have been any different? You can't. The game does not let you sprint while you carry Sarah. But there's that wondering, those shreds of guilt. It sounds obvious now, but it's pretty remarkable how those extra feelings of personal involvement within the experience of The Last of Us add in a way that just isn't possible in the show. As for the comparison between the two games, they're both great, but the key differences are in gameplay and overall presentation. If you value realism and gameplay elements that have had the better part of a decade to be polished, play the remake. If you're like me, though, you might value the way that artistic details shine when they don't have to rely on how close to reality they look. Small things like facial expressions seem more honed in and dramatic in the classic version. The combination of slight realism but an emphasis on artistic liberty makes for things like walls closing in feel more threatening, and a greater understanding of the strain someone's going through. The classic version is as a whole clunkier. Movement isn't as perfect, and there's hiccups in animation that the new engine smooths out in order to keep your immersion. Despite it all, there's also things that feel like they make less sense in the remake, like the way the screen turns black and white when you control Joel's breathing. All of that being said, I'm just happy I get to compare and contrast these parts without an ounce of disappointment yet. Each iteration of The Last of Us has something to offer. The show is great, and the game is, and while I don't think the remake is necessary, I appreciate the flourish it brings to this whole collection.